and welcome to Man's Model Moments. Now the flooding at the shop also distracted me from cleaning my airbrush out at the time, meaning I had another disaster on my hands when I came back to it. Of course, it's how you react to these things that's important, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to share how you can bounce back if something like this happens to your airbrush. So this is the problem. It's one of my cheap airbrushes that's endured quite a lot of abuse, and as you can see, the Hataka interior green in the cup has completely dried out in situ. Now this is completely recoverable, so let me show you what I do. Now the first step is to physically remove as much dried paint as possible, and here I'm going to use a pair of bent nose tweezers to help me in that task. Now depending on what paint you're using, the brand, how long it's been and so on, this task might be more or less difficult. It might be like here, where the Hataka paint is quite pliable and so comes out in larger pieces, or it might be something drier that forms more gritty or dusty bits. In any case, I'm trying to get as much paint away from the needle as possible so that I can then remove the nozzle assembly, which we will deal with later. For now, I just want to get access to the needle, which I'm going to unlock at the rear. Now do resist the temptation to pull the needle back through the airbrush. Instead, we're going to pull the needle through the brush from back to front. Once we get it out, you'll see why we did that. All that dried paint would potentially damage the seals at the rear of the brush, causing much worse problems down the road. Now we can clean off all the dried paint from the needle. And now the needle is out, we can have another go at removing paint from the cup without it being in the way. Also bear in mind that any big bits of paint we can get off now will make our next steps easier and more effective, but you also don't need to worry too much if there's things left. This is just removing what's accessible. You can also see the exterior of the brush is pretty messy, so we might as well take the opportunity to clean that up whilst we're here. The next step allows me to do some product placement, as I'm going to be using my own airbrush cleaner here, which I sell in the shop, though of course you can use other things like other proprietary airbrush cleaners, cellulose thinners and so on. I'm using this because they're not as harsh as something like Tamiya cleaner or cellulose thinners, and they have better miscibility with other solvents and thinners too. Whatever you choose, the main purpose of this step is to remove as much of the surface paint that we couldn't get off physically by itself. Use some tissue soaked in some cleaner and wipe inside the cup. As you can see, the results are pretty immediate, and it's quite a satisfying step because you can see the results straight away. You'll want to use several changes of tissue and also, unlike me, probably want to wear gloves and keep going at this until you're happy you've got all the big accessible stuff cleaned off. Now we've dealt with the big stuff, we can move on to those smaller and hidden parts of the paint flow pathway. To do this, we need to temporarily reassemble the brush. Now we effectively have a closed chamber, we can add some more cleaner, this time directly into the airbrush cup itself. Now if we hadn't done all that removal up front, this solvent would be spending most of its activity dissolving and softening that, rather than the stuff we can't see. So we can mix this up a bit as I'm doing here, but that's not strictly necessary as long as we give it some time to sit.
A few minutes later.
Now you can see this is looking a bit murkier. And if I mix that up and draw it up into the pipette, you can see there's a whole bunch of paint flakes that have come loose, any of which would cause major issues if we were trying to spray with the brush. So now we've let the brush sit in solvent, we need to go back, disassemble the brush again and get the tissues out. If you use some airbrush cleaning brushes, then this is the time to get them out, but I want to show you here that you can do all this cleaning with some very basic tools. A pair of bent nose tweezers and tissue are going to allow you to remove most, if not all, of any offending paint through the main body of the brush here. Use solvent on the tissue to remove more if you feel need to. And solvent-soaked tissue wrapped around your tweezers will allow you to access difficult to reach parts whilst also giving some physical abrasion and an absorbent surface. The nozzle is the last piece for us to clean and potentially the most tricky. If you're lucky and the paint didn't dry fully here, you may be able to get away with just using the needle inserted into the nozzle and removed, pulling any remaining paint with it. You can usually feel if this is the case. If it gets stuck or you feel resistance, don't force it, as you can damage the nozzle tip. If you feel little resistance, then some cleaner dropped into the lumen, using the needle as a cleaning rod, can clean it through. I'm getting a load out here, but I'm going to need more. That means more disassembly, and here I'm taking off the end of the airbrush to get access to the tip. I'm going to use some solvent just to clean off any paint here. Before moving on to the tip itself, most airbrushes will have a specific tool for this, and be careful to note any seals that come out and where they are located for reassembly. Once the tip is off, the needle can again be used through here to push most of the paint and cleaner out. Again, a cleaning brush makes this easier and faster, but isn't essential. Just make sure you're careful with your needle. The tip can then be soaked in cleaner.
A few minutes later.
And the needle used to ensure this is clear. Now the nozzle elements are clear, it's time for reassembly. I'm using the needle here as a guide to refit the tip of the nozzle, since this is a very fine thread and I don't want any misalignments. Just make sure your seals in this area are fitted correctly, which will vary depending on your airbrush make. You'll need to tighten this, most likely with the spanner that came with your brush, but not with the improvised tools I'm using here. The nozzle assembly can then be put back on the main body, again making sure you've any seals installed correctly before you fit them. If you don't fit your seals properly, your airbrush won't work. These generally only need to be hand tight, but again, check the instructions supplied with your airbrush, as some will use a tool for this too. Now I've still got a load of crap over the outer parts of my brush here, so I'm going to take a little time before fitting the needle to just clean this up and getting it looking a little nicer. Once again, I'm just using tissue with cleaner on, and the side of my tweezers to dislodge any large pieces that I can once the solvent's got underneath them. So that's the result, a clean airbrush, and you can tell I've not faked this because I've still got some of the old paint on the pressure adjustment screw at the front here, but that doesn't matter since I never use that anyway. So with everything clean, the needle can be reinstalled. Locked into place. And then I'm just testing the action to ensure everything is moving smoothly, and can check the end of the nozzle to make sure the needle is properly situated before putting the nozzle end fitting on. Okay, airline has been connected, and the last step is to run some cleaner through the brush, which is just a safeguard in case there's any tiny areas of paint that have slipped by. Normally I'd be spraying this straight into an airbrush cleaning jar, but here I'm just spraying it onto the paper on the bench so you can see it's all working. I'm then going to cover the end of the airbrush and blow back into the cup, just so that if there are any tiny dislodged fragments, then they can easily be removed. But as you can see, we're all nice and clean here, so I'm going to empty that out and just try to dry as much of the cleaner out of the cup as possible before blowing the last remnants through. Now although this looks empty here, there will be some solvent clinging to the surfaces inside the brush, so we don't want to go straight into painting here, especially with aqueous acrylics, so I'm going to use a bridge solvent. In this case ethanol, although IPA will also work just fine. Both of these solvents have extremely wide miscibilities, and so will remove the cleaner out of the airbrush and also allow us to transition to water without any issues. Once again, I'd normally blow this through into a cleaning pot, but you know the drill by this point. Another blow back and clean out, and we have a perfectly clean airbrush ready for whatever we want to use it for next. Now I've probably used about 20 to 25% of this cleaner doing that, and in real time it took about half an hour, and this was for the worst case scenario of completely dried paint in your brush. You'll need less solvent and time if things aren't this bad. So let's put our newly cleaned brush to the test. I'm going to use a metallic since they're harder to spray than normal colours, in this case Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium diluted with X20A thinner. I'm using a ratio of about 2 to 1 paint to thinner, so on the heavy side for spraying too. I'm just painting some Seafire landing gear here, and as you can see, the brush is performing as we'd expect, and I'm getting nice even coverage, though I did go a bit heavy on the second wheel. That was my fault, not the airbrush. After spraying, we now need to clean the brush. To start with, I'm just using water to dilute the paint in the cup and backflush to remove as much paint from the flow path as possible. I can then empty that away and wipe out the cup with tissue. I'm now putting a little thinner in the cup, spraying through, backflushing, emptying, wiping, and then repeating that process. This dilutes and removes paint each time. Despite that, we still have some silver down there, so the last thing I do is to put some cleaner with a pipette in to wash this out, and as you can see we're lifting a significant amount of paint here which we can get rid of. I'll then put some fresh cleaner in here, blow that through, blow back, remove and wipe. We're then able to leave our airbrush with the knowledge that we're in a good position to start when we come to it next time. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.